All right, good afternoon, everyone. I'm State Senator Seth Lewis, representing DuPage County, 24th Senate District. I'm honored to be here with my two Senate colleagues, Senator Don DeWitt, Senator Chapin Rose, and we are also part of your budgetary team. We have Mayor Brandon Johnson coming to Springfield, which we thought was today, but it's going to be tomorrow. And we're here because we believe the mayor's going to be asking suburban and downstate to help fulfill his City of Chicago budget needs. Now, don't get me wrong. The mayor has every right to be here and advocate for his city. But as duly elected legislators, we have every right and we have every responsibility to say no when his proposals threaten the financial stability and families that we represent as suburban and downstate members. It does seem like every few months, the mayor presents a new idea or regurgitates a old idea, wanting $1 billion for CTA, wanting $1 billion for a Bears Stadium, wanting $1 billion for transportation. You know, some may refer to him as $1 billion Brandon. But we are here to protect the suburbs and downstate from giving those billions to Chicago. Let me be clear, though. This isn't about Chicago in not wanting it to succeed. As a suburban legislature, I know that Chicago has to succeed. And a strong Chicago makes the suburbs better. But under Mayor Johnson's leadership, we have not seen that success. We have not seen the partnership that used to be between Chicago and the suburbs, where we wanted to work together, where we wanted to mutually succeed. His proposals seem more about getting money from elsewhere to fix problems in Chicago without the city addressing them on their own. Fiscal recklessness in the city hall should not become a burden of suburban Chicago families. In short, I will keep standing for the taxpayers, standing against bailouts, and standing for fiscal responsibility, because suburban families shouldn't be left cleaning up Mayor Brandon Johnson's mess. And with that, I'll turn it over to Senator Don DeWitt.
Thank you, Seth. Good job, Seth. Good afternoon, everyone. State Senator Don DeWitt, 33rd Senate District. I live in St. Charles and represent Kane and McHenry counties. My perspective on this issue comes not only from my role as a state senator here in Springfield, but also as the former mayor of the city of St. Charles for 8 years prior to coming to the General Assembly. Now, not for 1 minute will I suggest that running a community the size of St. Charles is anything like running a city like Chicago. But the fundamental responsibilities of running administration correlate regardless of the size of your community. I know how hard suburban families work to make ends meet, and how carefully cities have to manage their budgets and balance community needs with available financial resources. Sometimes difficult decisions have to be made in the interest of financial responsibility. And in my view, the mayor of Chicago does not seem willing or interested to make those tough financial decisions. Mayor Johnson has already just buried Chicago taxpayers under massive new debt, including an $830 million borrowing scheme that will eventually cost Chicago taxpayers nearly $2 billion by 2045. There's not even any principal payments required. They don't even need to start making payments for 2 years. And principal payments are held off for 12 years before they even start making payments on that debt service. I believe that's irresponsible regardless of the size of the municipality you run. And after failing to get his own city council to back his revenue schemes, he recently promised Chicago Teachers Union a $1.25 billion raise with no plan to pay for it. That now increases the average compensation of a Chicago Teachers Union teacher by 25%. That's outrageous. Again, after failing to get his own city council to back his revenue schemes, now he's coming to Springfield expecting suburban and Illinois taxpayers to make up the difference. We are not Mayor Johnson's personal piggy bank, and we shouldn't be forced to have to bail out his bad decisions. We must stand up for suburban and Illinois taxpayers to ensure their hard-earned dollars are protected from Mayor Brandon Johnson's fiscal mismanagement and irresponsibility. Thank you, and now I'm happy to turn it over to someone who also understands the budget process, Chief Negotiator for Illinois Republican Senate, Chapin Rose.
Thanks, Don. Thank you, Don. Thanks, Seth. Let's just be clear. Thanks to Governor Pritzker, there is no money for any of this. We're already facing a massive budget hole. I'll remind everybody that the Friday night before the presidential election, Governor Pritzker attempted to bury that $3.1 billion budget hole in the presidential election news cycle. And then suddenly the day before his budget address, he says, oh, look at this, we found more money, it's not as bad as we thought. Well, whatever it is, we've already got a deficit. So there is no additional money for Brandon Johnson. But as Senator DeWitt and Senator Lewis eloquently pointed out, why should there be? Why should there be? Why should the suburbs and downstate be bailing out the bad decisions of the city of Chicago? We don't have the luxury or the money to clean up Chicago's mess while our own communities are fighting just to keep basic services running. I mean, let's think about this. The man gives away the candy store at the Chicago Teachers Union and then turns around and asks the state taxpayers to backstop it. Cutting a blank check to the CTU, and he's coming to Springfield because he has no way, no plan to pay for it other than to soak the taxpayers of the entire state of Illinois. That's not the suburbs' problem. That's not downstate's problem. That's Mayor Brandon Johnson's problem, or billionaire Brandon, as Senator Lewis came up with. I thought that was fantastic. Look, our downstate schools are still working hard just to secure their fair share of funding under the school funding formula that we changed a few years ago. Chicago politicians, like Mayor Johnson, should not be allowed to jump in line just because they're from Chicago. Every dollar we send to bail out the city of Chicago and its mismanagement, and by the way, not just under him, but under the preceding mayor as well, we've been down this road for a while now, is a dollar taken away from the suburban and downstate classrooms, hospitals, roads, and critical infrastructure that our families count on every day. Taxpayers deserve honest leadership, not another bailout for big spending, big city politicians like billionaire Brandon. Thank you. Take some questions.
Senator Lewis, actually, or anyone who wants to weigh in about transportation. Clearly, whatever Chicago does has a domino effect on the suburbs and other parts of the state because you'd say it's the economic engine of the state. That being said, like the mass transit, the CTA Metro, RTA issue. Yeah, this would be.
Yeah, I'll let Leader DeWitt.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I mean, just kind of talk about where things stand with that. I mean, there have been talks for 3 years about these issues, and clearly that's one of the things that's a big ticket agenda item for Brandon. So where do things stand with that, the way you see it? Why haven't we seen any kind of any bill just yet?
You're referring specifically to transit issues?
Correct.
Yeah. So as you probably know, there are 2 pieces of legislation that were initially proposed regarding a fix. And again, that's a broad, in parentheses, that's a broad definition. The bill that appears to be gaining traction here in this building is the labor bill, Senate Bill 1938. I believe we are very close to agreed language on governance, which means pursuant to the labor bill, the Mass Transit Service Board stay intact. A newly empowered RTA board would become the over-encompassing agency to oversee those 3 service boards. That structure will remain intact. I believe, it's my personal belief, that the RTA never having full authority over those 3 service boards has probably driven most of the problems that has created so much strife with regards to mass transit in the Chicago metropolitan area. I think that's a key fix to this whole process. The governance issue is very close. We then need to jump into revenue issues. As I've said before, there are probably going to be multiple pieces of revenue that are going to help not only make up that $770 million fiscal cliff, just to maintain the status quo going into the 26 budget year, but moving forward to really create the type of mass transit system that we need and mass transit riders want in the metropolitan area. That $1.5 billion revenue stream is going to have to be generated. I think if we can get governance resolved, get the $770 million fiscal cliff resolved this session, and I think it can be done before the end of May, we can deal with the bigger problem down the road of how do we make the system better. But we need to reform the structure first so that the appropriate people have the authority to make the decisions they need to make to improve CTA, Metra, and PACE within the RTA mass transit system.
What role should Mayor Johnson play in all this, considering the city of Chicago has probably the largest piece of this, like, or, the mass transit package in Chicago?
Yeah, so if you're referring to the CTA with regards to its responsibilities in the city of Chicago, you are correct that they do currently receive the largest percentage of the RTA budget, about 60%, 65%. But if you take sales tax revenues generated just in the collars and add the fare box revenue, the suburbs actually generate almost as much money as the city does when it comes to feeding that RTA revenue stream. So the suburbs are not that far behind with regards to how much money is being generated to the system. We believe the CTA is as important to the city of Chicago as Metra is to us suburban riders and PACE bus services to suburban riders. And keep in mind that Metra has 18 stations in the city of Chicago.
Right.
Keep in mind that the CTA has 28 stations outside the city of Chicago in suburban Cook County. So this is one system that has to come together in a cohesive nature to really be able to come up with a system that A, can move into the future next year, but more importantly, continue to expand and make it better, to use Chairman Villavalam's phrase, into 2050, so our kids have a system they can really count on.
So Senator, to that end, I guess, kind of continuing on Jeremy's line of questioning there, with the majority of riders being from the city of Chicago, when it does come down to the funding aspect of this, how should that be divided up between what the entire state is paying into that, the suburbs, the collar counties versus the residents of the city of Chicago? Where exactly should all that be?
Sure, Ben, that's a great question. I think the fact that each of the three service boards have been operating in silos, basically since the inception of the RTA back in 1976, is what's led to issues like the CTA currently sitting on about a $5 billion debt. $2 billion of that is unfunded pension liability, and about $3 billion of that is operational debt that they have just incurred over the last 10, 15, 20 years they've been in operation. Pace Bus, Metra Suburban Rail has not dealt with any of those types of problems because I think they've run themselves in a very financially responsible manner. The CTA hasn't adjusted fares since 2018. That's a very long time ago, and the world has only turned inside out since 2018. I believe the other transit agencies has done a much better job managing their revenue streams, managing their finances, and have not created the types of holes that the CTA has created. So are they getting the bulk of the revenue from the RTA budget? Yes. Have they incurred significantly higher debt that are eventually going to fall on the backs of all of the taxpayers of the city of Chicago? And again, hopefully not on the backs of suburban riders or downstate riders with regards to the budget situation as a whole. We need to continue to drive for an overall RTA board that can determine what's in the best interest of all mass transit riders as it relates to the operation of the three individual service boards.
You guys are talking about protecting state dollars from going to a poorly managed Chicago. What about federal dollars? Right? I mean, you've got the potential of violence prevention grants being withheld, or the city's sanctuary status, or even DEI programs. Should the feds dangle that money and withhold it if they don't change their ways?
I'm processing your whole question. Yes, should units of government hold other units of government accountable if they're providing the funding on behalf of the taxpayer? I think that's what we're saying here from a state level. I understand what the feds are doing. The feds should fulfill federal law. No one's allowed to break the law. So if those funds were promised through law, they should still flow. Do federal funds help make the city of Chicago safer? They do. As stated before, I agree in a safe Chicago, a Chicago that is prosperous, a Chicago in which everyone wants to come visit. So investments such as those, absolutely. And that's what we're saying here for the city of Chicago, even at a state level. Am I willing to support a funding plan that helps Chicago get on the right track? But it's the current leader of Chicago that is causing the issues of trust for us to think about spending state resources to do this. So, and I think that's what you're seeing at the federal level. The current federal leadership is saying, we don't trust who's in charge to give more taxpayer money.
What things do you think Chicago needs to do, like specifically to bring about fiscal stability, to bring about better governance, better management of city resources and even state resources that pass through?
Well, as my colleague said, one, they just passed a $800 million spending plan by floating bonds with no principal payments. We saw that in the pension crisis. We got here in the pension crisis with the same way, where we paid zero principal and borrowed the money. We've learned our lesson as residents in the state of Illinois that doesn't work. Yet we go back to the same tricks. Two, public safety. Our Chicago Police Department, I think we're rebuilding the trust with them, but we've had years of undermining them. We need them to want to protect the city that they live in. We want them to be a part and not be disparaged as they have in the past. Our labor contracts with the Chicago Fire Department has gone on for 2 years. I mean, that doesn't give a firefighter or a public service employee much confidence. And these are decisions made by the current mayor of Chicago not to do this. That's the problem. We're talking a leadership issue, not gaining trust to rebuild Chicago and maintain its greatness as it once was. Yeah, so
Let me add two things. One, your first part, your first question, there's one common denominator here. You brought up the federal government. We're in the state. I mean, we can't control what the federal government does. However, there's one common denominator, Brandon Johnson. Okay? This is a matter of leadership first and foremost. To your second question, what you don't do is bail them out. Okay? So in the panoply of choices, the worst thing we can do is have these state taxpayers bail them out again. Okay? Eventually, it's time for them to pay their own piper.
The governor, in the last few days, he's pointed out that it's a little bit late for the mayor to be coming down to Springfield. Just broadly speaking, not just as Republicans, but just as legislators, would you be more willing to maybe listen to the mayor's priorities, maybe factor them into legislative discussions, into budget conversations if he came down earlier in the session?
Well, has he really been here other than one big speech he gave to the General Assembly? Right? I mean, look, I remember when I first started here in the House, you had Mayor Daley. You had a phalanx of people down here. And there were times where myself as a downstater would vehemently disagree with him. All right? A lot of times. But every now and again, based upon the relationships and conversations we had along the way, we could find common ground. This guy, where is he? And he just shows up and expects everybody to downstate in the suburbs just to hand him a blank check, to bail him out of his blank check he handed the CTU. No thanks.
All right, thank you guys. Appreciate it.